Boa tarde a todos. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. We're going to do this panel in English for the benefit of the discussion. But you already know that you have an option for translation on your screen. So this is panel 7. And we're going to talk about how to grow the infrastructure market in Brazil, analysis of successful cases, and remaining challenges. I am Pablo Pereira. I am a principal specialist with the PPP unit here at the IDB. I'm talking from Washington, D.C. And I have here with me 3 panelists. Marco Siqueira, who works also at the PPP unit of the IDB, who is right now in São Paulo. I have Ian Twinn. He is manager of public-private partnerships in Latin America and the Caribbean for the IFC. And I also have Guilherme Martins, who is head of the Department of Investment Partnership Program of BNDES, who has joined us from Rio, I suppose. So I would just briefly make an introduction about the topic we're going to discuss. In this panel, we're going to talk about a very successful initiative that is a joint venture between IDB, IFC, and BNDES, which is called the Private Sector Participation Facility, or PSP, but actually amongst ourselves, we tend to call it the facility. So that it's a project preparation fund that is managed by IFC with money invested from all the parties and with a great collaboration amongst ourselves. And since its creation in 2007, the facility has supported dozens of projects in several different sectors in Brazil, from social infrastructure to hard infrastructure, and it's regarded as a very successful case. So to start with, as I was mentioning, the governance structure of the facility is rather unique. We have a joint venture between 3 different types of development institutions: a local national development bank, which is BNDES. We also have IDB, which is a regional bank that is focused on Latin America and the Caribbean. And of course, we have IFC, which is a global institution. So, and over these years, the facility, other than helping governments at all government levels preparing projects, it has also played a role in disseminating knowledge and training people. And most of us actually have one way or the other benefited from the facility. And I'm talking about those who have worked in Brazil in the past, as it's my case. I was probably one of the first clients of the facility when I was at the PPP unit of the Ministry of Planning back in 2007. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here with a great panel, 3 specialists in the field who have a lot to talk about, this very successful experience. And I will start with Ian, and then I'll move on to the other panelists. So Ian, could you give us your views on why the facility has been so successful, and talk about how it compares to other experiences you have worked with at IFC?
Thanks very much, Pablo, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak today. Clearly, one of the major challenges of filling the infrastructure gap globally is the supply of well-structured projects. And I think there's a lot of debt and equity capital that's available for sound projects, but there tends to be a deficit of good projects if you look around the world. Now, there have been a number of attempts to try and meet that gap, be it through national project development agencies, or multinational initiatives like InfraCo in Africa or the IFC's own InfraVentures project development facility. But then there's other more recent examples like the Africa 50 initiative in Africa as well. So there have also been a number of joint ventures like the PSP facility we're talking about today in other countries. If you look around the world, one of the big challenges is combining on-the-ground knowledge of political dynamics and commitment to a project with a sense of the underlying economic viability, and then kind of international know-how of what's the best practice to structure a project, putting together the due diligence package, the appropriate kind of contract structure, and this kind of good stuff. I think one of the successes of the PSP initiative is the combination of local knowledge coming particularly from BNDES. I'd like to say all of us, but particularly BNDES, obviously, the local presence of the team, the PSP team being based in Brazil, and then also the knowledge of international structuring, kind of best practices, particularly from the DFI partners, so IADB and IFC. So I think that's one of the key drivers of success of the facility. Another one is, I think, over the life of the facility, there's been an emphasis on kind of a strict analysis of the risks going into projects, particularly at the start, and then kind of close monitoring as things have gone along. So good project selection. Now, the result is that you have a much higher project success rate. So over the life of the facility, I think that the success rate is something like 80%, which means that the facility actually has more now than it did at the beginning as a result of reinvested success fees. Now, that success rate is much higher than the 60% success rate that IFC has on its PP advisory business globally. And it's also much better than my understanding of what the success rate is of many of the other initiatives around the world. So things like InfraCo in Africa. I think that's a clear sign that the partners have been able to combine the strengths of the knowledge of project fundamentals, political willingness at whichever level in Brazil, and putting that together with good structuring and bidding packages for potential bidders. I think by comparison, international project development facilities sometimes struggle to navigate kind of local political environments, particularly if they're not based in the country. And then another factor in some cases has been constraints in national procurement laws, which mean that you have to kind of select the cheapest advisor rather than necessarily the advisor kind of with the best combination of expertise and value for money. So best value, if you like. So to me, those are the key drivers. I think the facility, if you compare it against other equivalent combinations around the world, but also international, multi-country facilities similar to it, I think this facility has been a standout. Thanks very much, Pablo.
All right, thank you, Ian, for this explanation on how you see, how PSP compares to other experiences throughout the world. I will move on to Guilherme. So Ian said, Guilherme, that the press was key in PSP's success. Can you talk a little bit about your perspective on why it's been so successful and why BNDES is so engaged in this initiative?
Sure. First of all, thanks IDB for the invitation. It's a great opportunity for BNDES to share some thoughts about the infrastructure activity, the project preparation activity in Brazil. And Ian, Marcos, and Pablo, it's a pleasure to share this panel with you guys. So in terms of what the facility delivered to the country so far, my view is fully aligned with the one Ian just mentioned, but just highlighting 4 points here. The first one is that, of course, the facility delivered projects that were quite relevant for the governors that hired the facility, for the society, the users that were affected by those projects, that mobilized dozens of billions of dollars in private capital in terms of investment. So the projects delivered so far, the portfolio of success is a first element of how we see the success and the delivers that the facility achieved so far. Second, a relevant portion of those projects became reference in their sectors. So just to mention 3 initiatives here, we see on the health sector in Brazil that the hospital PPP health project developed in Bahia State, what we call in Brazil Hospital do Subúrbio, became a reference in the health sector. On the education side, there is the Belo Horizonte project that also became a reference on the education PPPs in Brazil. And third, on the toll road sectors, both because of the São Paulo state program and because of the presence of the facility most recently on the federal level, the facility also contributed to introduce some innovations on those sectors that became starting points for other governments and for other projects on those sectors. So the best practice introduced by the facility on a variety of sectors became reference that overcome the portfolio itself. A third element of success is the management team, not only within the PSPInfra, within IFC, but also from partners that worked with the facility with IFC along this period. So, for instance, part of the BNDES team that currently work in our PPP advisory unit used to work in the past with IFC on those projects, and for sure that we did those track record were relevant to contribute to the expertise of our team and that we use nowadays in our own portfolio. And fourth, the consulting companies market in Brazil that became used to work on project preparation on the sell side of infrastructure, and of course that nowadays can offer this experience, this track record for other governments. In terms of the factors that enable those results, I would highlight 3 here. First, the stability. So we have here a 14 years old structure that works in favor of different governors in terms of the federal level, the state level, the national level as a whole. That led a team expertise within the facility and, as I just said, within its partners, and also accumulated lessons learned in a variety of dimensions, like project modeling, how to hire good consulting companies, how to manage those contracts, how to relate with grantors in Brazil in this variety of levels. So the stability and the track record within the 14 years structure is an important point in our point of view. Second, project selection. There are some enabling factors that needs to be there in every project in order to help us or to enable a reasonable or a good level of success. And this is a combination of a sector with a reasonable regulatory environment, a project with potential to deliver a feasibility business case to the market, and third, a client, a government that sponsors the project and has the ability to manage to take decisions when they are needed from the government side. And third, the window. Of course, that when we work for governments, there are the cycles, the mandates of state government, the federal level, municipal level, when in the beginning of those mandates is the right time to put projects in the portfolio, to start new projects, and then you have a window to put those projects to the market until a new electoral period starts to bring some noise to this process. So those are the success factors that, in our point of view, are there in PSPInfra, and also we are willing to or looking to put in every mandate that we have within BNDES current portfolio.
Thank you, Guilherme. You've raised many interesting points, but if I may highlight one, it all leads back to governance, right? Understood in its broad term, and this was key, right? And because governance allowed you to do so many things the right way, and that's very interesting. I would like to come back to this later, and I'll move on to my good friend Marcos. And other than a good friend, he is also a co-worker. We work together at the PPP unit at the IDB Marcos, can you please share your perspective, the perspective of the institution we both work for?
Sure, Pablo. Thank you, Ian, Guilherme. It's a privilege to be here to discuss this, which technically seems to be the most important topic on the table when we do. Can you hear me well? Can you hear
Yes,
me well? Okay. But what seems to be the most important topic when we discuss the future of private sector participation infrastructure, not only in Brazil, but Latin America in general, which is how to design the institutions that will prepare the projects that will be taken to the market. This is the key issue on the table. And IDB has always prioritized the efforts associated with project preparation, and we are very proud to be one of the partners of the PSP facility. We, as with my colleagues, IDB share your enthusiasms in the sense that the facility has been extremely successful. As Ian mentioned, this unmatched, not only in any other institution that we've been in contact with, but also in any government around Latin America in general. And Guilherme mentioned the more than an overall success rate. There's this key point of changing lives of facility with these key projects that have become kind of the reference for sectors in health and education. So it's been successful. But what I think, as we investigate a bit down the line, why has it been so successful? And I think the facility proved the case. And in historical perspective, we should acknowledge it, which is when it was created 15 years ago, there was a clear discussion in the Brazilian context, and to be honest, kind of that was also being discussed in other countries in the region, which was who should be, which characteristics should we design for an institution dedicated to prepare projects? Should it be inside the line ministry or design its own infrastructure PPPs? Should the Ministry of Health design its own health PPPs? And there was a case which said no. It made sense for some of us, at least, that structuring private sector participation deals is such a specific task to do that made sense to design an institution which is not focused on transport or health, but it's focused, on the other hand, on preparing PPPs, preparing transactions, and in institutions that should be separated from the policy design institutions, from the people who are designing public policy. And there was by no means an obvious case. It was actually a hard case to make, in the sense that there was a pushback. Institutions like ministries were saying, "No, give us this thing." There is no reason whatsoever to design a third-party institutions responsible for conducting the studies of project preparation. And what I think the facility proves after 15 years, with this fantastic success record that you guys just mentioned, is that that case made sense. And why it made sense? It's because preparing private sector participation projects is in itself a very specific activities. Public agencies, they do not have the, I would say, the basic knowledge, expertise, routines to prepare projects. They have lots of things to do. They have to implement public policy, and designing PPP projects is not the same as implementing PPP projects. And then a specialized entity, which these days we call project preparation facilities, can be the right thing to do. So this is the perspective of IDB, that this makes sense. I think there are problems that come out of this, and the PSP facilities also show challenges. But I just want to mention that IDB has believed that to create dedicated entities to prepare projects that are not the same entities that own concession contracts, they should be created. And we've been supporting other institutions like this one, as I know IFC has also done in other countries, in Colombia, Jamaica, and other parts around the world, always believing that that we need a professional expertise, project preparation, which is different from sector expertise, sport or finance, or even other types of investment professional practices. But as I was just saying, this does create a challenge, and I think one particular challenge it does create, and we need to look at this challenge as we look forward, not only for the future of PSP, but also for the future of other project preparation facilities, is that if we do agree that it needs to be specifically designed institution to prepare projects, that it needs to be very aware of what generates value for the public sector. That is, what is good projects. There is a public side to this good project, but I'll leave that for the discussion later on, Pablo.
All right. Thank you, Marcos. This is very thoughtful. And there is a lot to unpack, of course. And I'm thinking, for those of us who are working for our respective governments, and I'm talking about people who are watching us, they're probably thinking, well, this is great, but how can I do something similar to that in my own country? And then I will move back to Ian. What are your thoughts, Ian? Can it be replicated? Because I think one key element that came out is the one of technical independence, right? So it survived the political cycles. And we all know that this is key for infrastructure, right? That political cycles are short, project cycles are long. So, but every country is different, right? It's not like you have a recipe and you simply boil it in a saucepan and there you go. So Ian, can you share your thoughts on that? What do you think about it?
Sure, Pablo. So, I think, yes, bottom line, in theory, you can replicate it elsewhere. I think it depends on a few key success factors, which all of us have kind of touched on, I think, during the discussion so far. One of them, I think, is combining local knowledge of the commercial attractiveness of the opportunity together with knowledge of the political realities around developing a particular project, and then and commitment. And I guess part of that is the political cycle. And then combining those things together with the technical expertise on how to put a project together, right? So you kind of want to have 3 or 4 different success factors, and I think Guillermo put them very nicely. We've tried as IFC to do it in a few different times in different places by partnering with government authorities to put together a facility for a particular country. It hasn't always worked out, to be frank. One of the cases I can think of, perhaps we weren't quite aligned in terms of the institutions, in terms of, what our roles would be, right? So everybody wants to do the same thing and it doesn't kind of work out so well. Another case, our counterpart was told from a legal perspective that they just weren't allowed to do this with an international entity, that was kind of overlapping what they were set up to do. So therefore they couldn't do it. When you think about it at the national level, doing it on a country by country basis, I think it's important to think about the size of the country or the region. So perhaps it's easier to do it and maybe more attractive to do it in a large country with a significant need, like a Brazil. I think if you try to do it in a small island country, obviously it may be that there are only a handful of viable PPPs and therefore it's not worth doing a facility. Now, if you go to the regional level to kind of adjust for that, and we tried to do that as well, I think you get a couple of challenges. So one is the further you get away from the locality, the less in tune you are with the political realities, right, and the political commitment to a project. So that's one challenge. And then particularly if you have your project develop a team, and I guess PSP, the team is clearly in Brazil. In some other cases, not IFC, but other project development facilities that I've been involved in over my career, the team have been based in far away from where the projects are being developed. And I think that just separates them from what's going on in the locality. So as you think about going from doing a facility dedicated to a particular country, if you have the scale of that country, fantastic. if you don't have the scale and you end up thinking, well, I need to do one for this group of countries, then you need to be very thoughtful about where you locate the staff, that they're able to kind of get in and have a sense of what's going on in the locality, that kind of local knowledge. I think that's very important. And I think the last thing to think about if you're setting up a facility like this is kind of how you set it up from a financial point of view. So I think in the beginning, probably the PSB, I wasn't involved at the very beginning, but I understand that one of the challenges was kind of building the reputation in the beginning. So you need to have a kind of runway of resources available to kind of enable you to do that. So kind of putting together a financial structure that gives you the sustainability to build the success that will then beget more success. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ian. Very interesting points. So, Guilherme, of course, your shop does Brazil only, right? So you don't have much to say about other countries, but Brazil in itself is very diverse. And you have other experiences in terms of project preparation going on. And it'd be nice to hear your perspective, because you certainly work, with different arrangements, and to what extent these other arrangements were sort of inspired by the facility, and how they have in some ways improved what the facility has already put in place in Brazil 15 years ago.
Brazil is a large-scale country, almost a continent in terms of size of population, and for sure that we need a combination of efforts in order to fill the gap of project preparation and help to fill the gap of investment in infrastructure. So we see nowadays the facility PSPInfra with the role that BNDES plays with its own portfolio is complementary, as well as the role that other PPP's advisory units plays in the country. That combined helps the country to achieve a greater level of development. And of course that we are every moment discussing best practice and how we can interact, how we can learn from each other. As I mentioned before, part of the team that we have at PPP, the advisory unit of BNDES, already worked in the past quite closely with IFC in some of those cases of success. So this experience helped a lot us in terms of how to structure our own PPP advisory unit, how to structure our internal process, for instance, how to hire high-level consulting companies, how to manage those contracts, how to improve the relationships that we have with government. So in a variety of ways, we learned from this experience, and we believe that nowadays we have a different approach in our PPP advisory unit, including because of the lessons learned of the facility.
All right. Thank you, Guilherme. And, Marcos, I will pick up on your last point and kind of move on with the discussion. You talked about the design case, right? You said that PSP proved the case for how to design an institution, but this also brought to the table some challenges, and so not everything is rosy here, right? And it would be interesting to hear about the challenges, picking up on the last part of your last intervention.
Indeed, not everything is rosy. Indeed, the creators, I would say the four founders of the facility. One of them is just walking out of the auditorium right now, and Ricky Pinto is here with us. But when it was first designed, I think again it was designed to create a professionally dedicated team to structure good projects. That's what the reference Ian did at the beginning of his point. but what a good project. I mean, if a country in Latin America, just because that's the realm of our intervention here, IDB, is concerned in doing a PSP or a project preparation facility, I think it needs to have a clearer view than the facility had at the beginning of what a good project is. I explain myself. Typically, when the infrastructure professional community refers to, okay, we need facilities to guarantee there are good projects to the market, it's typically a synonym of bankable project, a project that offers a balance of return and risk to the private investors. And if you do that, you have investment in infrastructure. But I think that's not the complete story. I think there's another half of this story, that is, projects need to create value for governments or users as much as they need to create value to investors in order for them to be successful. And I think as of 2021 and the state of the evolution of the Latin American PPP programs in general, we are in the point of maturity in which to be bankable is not enough. I mean, a project that generates private sector investment in infrastructure, although it might be extremely privately attractable, that is financially feasible, if you wish. This is not and should not and could not be the only, although relevant, but should not be the only, and I would even say perhaps not even the primary source of feasibility assessment. There's what the region needs, Latin America needs, and to the rest of the world, I suppose, needs to promote investment. It's investment that generate values to users in terms of quality of services, to the environment in terms of sustainability, to the future generations in terms of fiscal sustainability. So good projects, the concept of good projects have evolved in the last 20 years. And the new facilities need to evolve with it. So going to the question that Pablo posed, I think one of the lessons IDB takes from being a partner of such a tremendously professional institutions as IFC and BNDES is that we need increasingly to direct the focus of those entities, those entities which prove the case that it needs a professional specialization to prepare projects, the project preparation facilities. They need to focus on mechanisms to not only create values to investors, but also create, and increasingly so, create value to users and government. That is the concept of projects. Yeah. Of good projects need to address that. And I think this is a lesson. This has not always been the case with the institutions in Brazil, and I think we'll all learned. And I think this should be our key focus to the future.
Thank you, Marcos. We have about 5 minutes left. So I want to start kind of wrapping up, picking up on what Marcos said. So it's his point is very interesting. What is a good project, right? And from what I understood, it's one way of looking at it. It's a project that creates value to all stakeholders, governments, users, and investors. And sometimes those of us who are involved in project preparation, we want so badly, to take it out for a bid that sometimes we tend to forget that maybe the best criteria to judge a successful project is not only there's been more bidders than you were expecting, but over the life cycle of the project, what were the benefits that it brought to society, right? And this sometimes in the heat of project preparation, and those of us who have been there, we know that it's very hard, when you're like putting it together to balance things out, right? And then moving back to Ian, so looking forward, Ian, how do you see the facility in the coming years? How can it work even better?
I guess Two things. So one thing I wanted to pick up on was, exactly what Marcos was talking about, right? So when I think about what is a good project, I always think about having a sustainable project. And I mean that in the broadest sense. So not just environmental and social sustainable, but, in corporate governance sustainable and all those things, good things, important things that we would look at. But that it's both commercially and financially sustainable. So the underlying business makes sense. The structure that's being put together isn't over leveraged or whatever, so it's financially sustainable. But also that the contract has a good balance between the sponsors and the government. Because when you do a PPP, it's kind of like a marriage, right? It's going to go on for the next 20, 30 years. And, the world changes over that time, and the contract has to have some flex in it to adjust for those things. So to me, when I think about what's a good project, I'm thinking about a sustainable project. But when I mean a sustainable project, I mean commercial, financial, environmental, etc. But I also mean that it has this flex that, in 10 years' time, it's not a sweetheart deal, going to be perceived as a sweetheart deal that will have a challenge with users or, the population not supporting it anymore. But also that if there are, COVID-19 happens and the market changes dramatically for a while, that it has some flexibility to adjust for that. So that, to me, is what's a sustainable project. And I think that's kind of, in my mind, when I look at projects in IFC, that's kind of what I'm looking for. Now, in terms of where does the facility go from here? So I think, obviously, it's been very successful. One of the challenges now, I think the main challenge, frankly, is managing that success. So while financially it's in very good shape, I think there's probably more demand than there is human capacity right now. So this is obviously a people business. So it takes a while to hire good people and then kind of get them up to speed. So that's one of the challenges, kind of how do you manage the success? How do you manage the growth of the program? Now, one way to do that is by doing a programmatic approach. There's other things you can do, but I guess we're running out of time, so I'm going to hand back to you. Thanks, Pablo.
Thank you, Ian. So briefly, just pick up on Ian's last point. How do you manage success in such a complex environment as themselves? So how do you manage that, Guilherme?
I like the approach that Marcos brought, that these activities are multi-stakeholder activity where we need to find an interface between government priorities and what is a good project from a variety of angles. So when we find an opportunity to put those elements in place and to bring private capital that will enable a relevant increase in the quality of a given public sector that would not be there without the facility, I would say that this is an opportunity, a priority for the facility and for the partner. So at the moment, within the governance of the facility, what we call the Oversight Committee, we are discussing some opportunities in a variety of sectors like railways, sanitation, health and education. And those are some, I would say, paths where BNDES would be happy to see new case of success aligned with the strategy that Ian just mentioned, that things to be done in a programmatic way so that we leverage the resource that we have. We have limitation in terms of human resource, in terms of funding. So when we tackle projects together in a program, of course, that we scale up the results that we achieve.
Thank you, Guilherme. Marcos, you have just like 30 seconds for your last remarks. We are
I'm sorry, I had a
just your thoughts on
here listening in Portuguese, but yeah, I think it's for IDB. It's a pleasure to partner with such an institutions that ultimately the goal of all of us is to improve lives, and thus focusing on projects which are sustainable to deliver value for users and governments is the way to change lives in a sustainable way for the 21st century. And thus the project preparation facilities need to balance the need of independency with the need of alignment with the strategic policy. And I think under the correct mechanisms of governance, as Pablo mentioned at the beginning, is the way forward, and it's the way we've been trying to reproduce in several countries around the world. And I'm sure this all will contribute to more and better investment in infrastructure, better services, and thus meeting our institutions' goals of changing lives.
So thank you, Marco. So with your remark of back to the beginning, so we close the circle and we close the panel. Thank you very much, all the panelists. I think the discussion was great. Thank you, everybody who've been watching us. And if you have any questions, most of us are in the platform. You can feel free to send them directly to us. Thank you.